Hello, Endeavor here. And today I'm speaking with Praise of Folly. How you doing today, Todd?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. So today we're going to be talking about monarchism versus republicanism. What builds a better society? What's better for societal cohesion? What really makes a more unified nation? And I guess just what system is kind of just better. I'm going to be arguing in favor of monarchism. I've made a few videos before in the past on why I do appreciate the idea of monarchism. Todd's going to be arguing for the idea of republicanism. And I guess I'll just start off by making my case for monarchism. I think that monarchy is the natural state of society. It seems that human societies, they always seem to develop into monarchies from, in Europe, pretty much prehistorically. Like even these like old tribes had a chieftain. It would have been some kind of would have been the equivalent of a monarch. And that was really the norm for most of history in both Europe and in Asia, even in places like Africa and the native tribes in the Americas. Monarchy was pretty much the norm, and I think that it's just probably the most stable form of government, and it's really it really allows kind of a society to pass on its leadership. So it kind of creates this societal lineage of rule. And that's something I do really appreciate. I will also add, though I mean, we can probably get into it later, that I've made videos on this in the past, that I think that it's not a realistic goal right now. Like, I'm not going around telling people we need to, reinstate Louis the 14th. But I think that it's a good system to look to, and to look to the benefits of it, and really try to replicate some of those in the future. So I'll let you go ahead, Todd. What's your argument for republicanism?
Okay, yeah. So the first thing to start with is Aristotle's classification of government: the rule of the one, the rule of the few, and the rule of the many, which are monarchy, aristocracy, and polity. Now, a republic is, by definition, a mixed government which has elements of all three. So a republican, in the classic sense, doesn't discount in toto the virtues of a monarchical executive, which is why Sparta had two kings and Rome had two consuls. But they also see that the Republican system sees it as all three together are stronger than individually. So that's where you get the Roman fasces, the bundle of sticks, where one stick can easily be broken, three sticks can't. Now, for a republic, one of the things that as far as the national good, that republics are head and shoulders above monarchies, is in the realm of people being ruled by their own ethnicity. This is from Eric von Kuenen-Ledine's Leftism from Sade to Marx to Hitler and Marcuse, pages 42 to 43. And Eric says, yet monarchy is basically a supranational institution. Usually the monarch's wife, his mother, and the spouses of his children are foreigners. With two exceptions, Serbia and Montenegro, all the sovereign ruling houses of Europe in the year 1910 were foreign by origin. Nationalism is populist by contrast, and the typical Republican constitution insists that the president be a native of the country. So from the point of view of the national good, which this is what the debate is about, republics have a much better track record of acting in the national good of their people. Since monarchs tend to be foreigners, they rely on foreign intervention to keep them propped up, like Louis XVII appealing to Austria, Charles I appealing to Scotland and France, and foreign mercenaries. And in fact, so you had in England, Vortigern, the petty king, invited the Saxons over, which then led to the ethnic cleansing of the Romano-Britons. You see also in, like I said, France, they had the Swiss Guard, again, foreign mercenaries, not the indigenous people. So they have far more in common with international corporations. If you look at Europe as the market share and the houses as corporations, they're competing for market share. The House of Anjou, which is a cadet branch of the House of Valois, alternatively at one point had over half a dozen kings from different countries under its name. And if someone is going to take the stand that international corporations and international institutions are harmful to the national good, then monarchy really by nature has to be harmful to the national good, because if we look at the metaphysics of monarchy, it's based on the occult principle of as above, so below. So whether it was pagan Rome or Christian Rome, whether it was Zeus or Christ, the chief god ruled the spiritual realm. He ruled over the gods, the demigods, or the angels. And then by extension, he ruled over the physical world. So the emperor, being the as below representation of as above, models his society on the same way. So he then says, okay, well, I'm going to have the dominion of all under heaven. And that's exactly what the Romans thought, the Chinese, and imperial wannabes like Genghis Khan. And so from practice and from first principles, as an international institution, monarchy is not compatible with the national good, whereas republicanism is, because its first principle is the good of the nation.
I mean, I think that the thing that is really missing today is that societal foundation that really kind of that really forced that binds society together. That I think that monarchy served that in the past, and that I think that the monarch was really seen as, I mean, the monarch was the sovereign, the supranos, meaning they were above, and the monarch really was the embodiment of the power of the state. And I think that the idea of republicanism, you know, I'm not hostile to it entirely. What I'm hostile to is the idea of liberal democracy, which as it's been practiced for the last 70 years. And I think that that really has been really the lack of monarchy has been one of the has really been one of the driving forces to, you know, just the deconstruction of many of these Western nations. Like, I don't get the same sense that I don't get the same sense that when monarchy was has not really played a active role. There isn't really like a unified England as there would have been underneath underneath the monarch. And I do think that a monarch also serves two purposes. It serves as that unifying force, that unifying sovereign, and then it also can work as a governing force. I think that both are important, and I can see monarchy in the present day. Some of them, if they retain the role of the unifying force, I mean, that would be better than nothing. The thing is that a lot of them still don't even do that today. So like, there isn't like any sense. Like, for example, I live in Canada. It's technically a monarchy, but like, there's no sense that we're like these subjects of the same crown. And there's like, it's a completely dead concept. And really, like, it's that kind of idea that I'd like to revive. And I think that monarchy really can do that for a lot of societies. It really can just be like this binding force. It is like kind of this the entity that is always there, and it's the entity that kind of society is geared towards, and that the politics of the society is it's run in order to serve that. So I really like the idea of like what they used to say in the English Parliament was that it would be the king's opposition and the king's like the both the parties. The idea was that they were both for the king, but they were on different sides politically, but they were both part of the same body, working for the same political entity. And that's really I think the benefit of monarchy, and I think that's the real thing that we're missing today.
So when you say nation, we need to make this clear. You're talking about not, say, Europe or North America. You mean something more specific, like England or France, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, but historically, monarchy has not been good for the nation. The Roman Empire gobbled up nation after nation after nation, amalgamating it into the whole. That's what the Russian Empire did and the British Empire. It's not good for the national identities of other peoples, and even the people themselves. The Roman stock. So in the 1st century AD, Augustus Caesar is complaining that the Roman stock is not reproducing. And so the imperial setting even leads to the self-delusion and extinction of the people that made it.
So what you're saying is that the monarchy weakens nationalism versus strengthening it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a historical case. You look at the French Revolution, where modern nationalism begins. It's Louis XVII that brings in foreign powers to try to destroy the French identity that's arising. And yet he's defeated, and then they spread these ideas of nationalism to the rest of Europe, which then destabilizes the other monarchies.
Yeah, but I don't think that necessarily needs to. I don't think that monarchy necessarily weakens that, because for a lot of these countries, the monarch really was the symbol of. It was really the symbol of the state. I mean, like what Louis XIV had said was, "I am the state," and that, like, I feel like without the monarchy, there's less of a France, there's less of a Russia, there would be less of a Britain, even though, I mean, like I said, the British monarchy is pretty much it's a shell of its former self. I think, like, without that, it doesn't seem like to be as strong of a society. It doesn't really seem to be as cohesive. I know that monarchies, they've been imperial, and I mean, you could say that for a foreign for a foreign ruled group. Perhaps they don't hold that same weight, but I do think, though, that for a people, have the idea that you have kind of a monarch that overlooks the people, and that really is the foundation of their society. That's one that I don't necessarily think that's a that's a disunifying force.
But the monarch divides the people. The aristocracy have a completely different. Did you see the Trildu Tom video about monarchy and Hapa?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, Trildu Tom gets into that, and he talks about how the elite, because, as according to Hapa and Democracy, the guy that failed, entry is closed to anybody not in the elite class. What it does is it divides society between the ruled and the rulers. And so the people don't see themselves as the same as the monarchs, and vice versa, getting to the point where in Spain in the 1930s, on the eve of the revolution, the Spanish nobility saw the peasants as almost a different species, like, say, Southern plantation holders viewed Negroes.
Well, I would say that I'm in favor of some kind of aristocracy, some kind of hierarchical society, because that, to me, I see that as the natural form of rule. I see that egalitarianism is not natural. Societies didn't form like that. They always ended up with a ruling class of some kind. I think that, and I would argue that in present day we actually have the same kind of ruling class. Like one thing that I believe, I can't remember where I found these statistics, but I heard that there's actually more income inequality in present day America than there was in France prior to the French Revolution. So I don't think that this idea that there's this ruling class and the ruled, I don't think that's ever gone away. I think, though, that what has gone away is the idea that the ruling class embodies some kind of virtue. So, as in, like, they are like a they are like a stock that is meant to really embody everything that's good in the society. I think that's something that's really been lost, and that our ruling classes, I would call them today, as in the elites, they embody anything but virtue. It just seems completely they don't really seem to have any they don't really seem to have any skin in the game.
Well, hold on. The objection isn't that the ruling classes weren't there. It's that in pre-revolutionary Spain, they didn't even see themselves as the same people. They saw each other as foreigners in their own country. That doesn't happen well, I mean, when any system collapses, I suppose that can happen, but we see that more common. It's already built into the system with monarchy, because the elites are often foreign anyhow. And so why would somebody who's a French peasant, or better yet, an English worker, have solidarity with a German prince who's ruling over their kingdom?
Well, I think that historically England has had that, wouldn't you say? There has been a solidarity. It's really kind of been the
To some extent, but that's because, this is the England after the monarchy's been pretty much neutered after 1688, because from 1640 to 1688, the people were trying to get the king's head.
So, but I think though that but I mean, it did run a successful society for quite a long time. I mean, monarchy was the system. It was pretty much the default prior to Well, I don't know. I mean, the French Revolution, it was pretty much seen as the default. I mean, I know that historically there have been republics like ancient Rome, Athens, and I mean, there's plenty of examples. But the point is, though, is that I don't think that monarchy necessarily isn't stable because it lasted for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, republicanism uh, is a relatively newer idea. I mean, so I don't agree that monarchy was something this like that was a system that that everyone was just waiting to take the monarch's head, though.
No, it's not a short-lived system. It's a system that doesn't act in the national good.
But I mean, didn't it last though? I mean,
the Soviet Union lasted, but nobody's going to say it acted in the national good.
Well, the Soviet Union didn't last. It only lasted 70 years. Monarchy lasted thousands of years.
Deborah, that's irrelevant. Was something acting according to the principles you want it to? No, it's an international clique of elites that are not acting in the interest of the people. When you invite Saxon invaders in, like Vortigern, to have your country devastated, that's not in the national interest. Let me put it this way. How many republics bring in foreign powers and foreign mercenaries to prop up their government? How many prime ministers have done that?
Well, they do it. They do it today, like with like Nicaragua during the Cold War, South Vietnam during the Vietnam War, North Vietnam during the Vietnam War.
But those aren't republics. The communist ones are. That's a whole separate kind of government. I already gave the definition of a republic, and the communist states aren't republics.
Well, I mean, the idea of a republic, though, it just means not a monarchy.
No, a republic is a mixed government with elements of the rule of the one, the few, and the many.
Well, I mean, republicanism by definition means no monarchy, though.
No, republicanism is not just any government that isn't a monarchy. That's not what republicanism is. Republicanism, I mean, by that standard, then, egalitarian hunter-gatherer tribes like in the Iroquois were republics, but they weren't.
Okay, but I mean, here's my argument, though. I mean, I don't think that it necessarily was in the bad for society as a whole, because I mean, Europe developed into the greatest civilization on earth under monarchy. I mean, republicanism in Europe. I mean, in 1815, the only republic in Europe was Switzerland, and it was still like far and above the best. These societies in Europe were still far and above the best in the world. So I don't think that monarchy was entirely a negative for the society as a whole. I mean, I think didn't the English people have a much better life under the monarch in, say, 1800 than most other places on earth? I mean, I don't think that it was a negative for their society.
Well, sure, but England had a better standard of living under Oliver's Cromwell than under his Commonwealth than under any other kingdom in the world, except maybe Holland. That was a republic. But that's not. So what do you mean by the national good then? I mean, if you're a part of an integrated international empire with foreigners taking over your country, that's exactly what you're complaining about now.
Well, I don't. Well, the thing is that didn't happen back then, though. I mean, like one of the arguments that I don't usually phrase it this way, but one of the arguments that was used by Nick Land was that monarchy is essentially it's the private property of the state is the private property of a monarch, whereas in a republic it seems to be a public property, meaning that the monarch would be a lot more careful with their land than a republic is, where it's seen as a common good. I mean, I think that was even Aristotle that said what's held in common by everyone is valued by no one. Now, I mean, I don't generally phrase it that way, but I do agree with that argument that I feel like the monarch has a lot more incentive to actually create a better society than it would be the case in a liberal democracy today, where these politicians have absolutely no skin in the game whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Russia and Austria-Hungary, people didn't have skin in the game because they turned to revolutions.
Well, I think though that I'd say that they very much did have skin in the game because they got killed because of it. I mean, that was what happened.
No, that's not skin in the game. It's like the opposite of that. If you have to kill somebody,
No,
Uh,
no, no. Hold on. The reason that they got that there was a revolution was because they did a bad job. I mean, I think that's a pretty good incentive not to do a bad job. Whereas what happens today is these politicians who have invaded Europe with third world migrants, they're just going to retire and go on to have their $100,000 a year salaries and never have to deal with the problems that they've instilled on countless generations in the future. I mean,
that's exactly what the monarchs in Europe did after Napoleon. They didn't learn from the mismanagement of the Bourbons. The Bourbons messed it up again, and they were deposed in what 1848.
I mean, I don't think that I don't think monarchy has ever done as poorly of a job running Europe as the current democratic systems have in the last 70 years.
Yeah, it has. When the 30 Years' War tore Europe to pieces instead of 70 years of peace, or when Vortigern invited the Saxons in to ethnically cleanse the Britons. I mean, we're not there yet, Endeavor. We haven't had ethnic cleansing of the Britons yet.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'd say though is that today I mean, I don't think that Europe prior to the Second World War never allowed for foreigners to just come in and take over their lands like they are today. I mean,
oh yes, they did. I just told you about Vortigern. I told you about how the French were backed up by foreign mercenaries.
Yeah, but I mean that never did the same amount of damage. I mean that they're never
the French led the ethnic cleansing of the Britons. It did way worse damage.
Well, I mean the state that they're in now. I mean Britain's is looking like it's gonna become an Islamic state, though.
Yeah, but okay. So they're both bad. But what's the point? I mean, we're talking about on net, which leads to people that act in the interest of the people they're ruling over. I mean, for example, let's look at Scotland when you had or even England with the enclosure laws, when the people were kicked off their land to raise cash crops and were hurtled into the cities. I mean, is that necessarily in their interest? A lot of them turned to radical socialist policies that way.
Well, I'd say that didn't that develop England further, though. I mean, the enclosure. So I mean, why wasn't that a positive, though?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're with the working class who gets kicked off the commons, then it's bad for you, but it may not be bad for someone else. But this gets back to the point, though. The monarchs didn't learn from the mismanagement of the Bourbons. The idea that because they own it, they have an incentive not to screw it up. They had 100 years to reflect on what happened in the French Revolution, and they pretty much didn't change anything. And they one by one got toppled, either in wars like Germany and Austria or by revolutions like Russia.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to remember though that these systems that I mean, this is historically recent. I mean, monarchy, again, like I said, it was kind of the norm for most of history up until the last 200 years or so. So I don't think that
that's not an argument. That's like when anarchists say, well, prior to the development of the state, when we were hunter-gatherers, anarchism was the norm. And that's true. But again, I don't see you advocating a return to anarchism.
Yeah, but the thing is that what I try to look at is what kind of runs a more stable society, because my real problem today is that I see that there really isn't any unifying force in society, and there really is no there is no sense that there's something that you want to preserve. And I really see the kind of political system today as just a bunch of people that are really just acting in their own interest and not in the interest of a society, of really building a society. And I'd say that I don't see the same problem with that. I see this as a much more recent problem. And for republicanism, like, I mean, I'm not entirely opposed to it, but I think that I think that we've lost out certain things with not having a monarch, though, because like the problems that I see today. I mean, I don't think this would have happened in a more structured, a more hierarchical, and a more traditional society.
But Endeavor, it did. All these revolutions overthrew the system you're talking about, so it happened on that system's watch. They weren't able to stop it then. Why would they stop it now?
Well, I mean, they won't stop it now because I mean, like I
Yeah,
had said, that they're.
but they didn't even stop it then. So what's the argument here?
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, the pretty much the argument is that it's not necessarily republicanism that I'm opposed to per se. It's the idea of liberal democracy. That's the real problem. And
Sure, but republicanism isn't reducible to liberal democracy.
so yeah, because what I said was that, but I think that monarchy had aspects that would have countered that, and that I don't think that they would have, that the same societal problems really took place.
But again, they did happen under the monarchies. That's how we got here. The monarchies got overthrown by the radicals.
Okay, but I do think though that I do think that there's value in it though, because I mean it's a, like I said, it's been a stable system. I don't think that necessarily monarchy is always has for all its history just been waiting to be overthrown. I don't see that as really the case. I mean, there's still plenty of monarchs today in say the Middle East, and I don't see them. I see them as much more stable than say Western Europe is today.
Well, the point is not that, well, as far as monarchy being replaced earlier in times, they were replaced by other, not revolutionaries, but other dictators and despots and other monarchs that wanted to be. But let's go back. Republicanism in the Mediterranean after Alexander the Great was the norm. The Greek city-states, Carthage, the Roman Republic. Republicanism was the norm until Caesar, and then Caesar restored the autocratic rule that had been the case prior to that. Now, if we look at the ancient world, the most dynamic, successful people were republics, the Greek city-states in Rome. They were the ones that defeated the Oriental despots in Egypt and ended up becoming the most vibrant, developing culture with new philosophies, new ways of government. And when the Roman Empire consolidates Europe, there's stagnation. Innovation is stifled, and we just sort of go on this autopilot.
Well, I mean, ancient Greece per se was not entirely a republic. I mean, ancient Athens was, but places like Sparta and most of the city-states would have had some kind of monarchy, wouldn't they have?
Well, Sparta is often classified as a republic by political philosophers like Locke and Machiavelli. Because republic doesn't mean you reject all the principles of monarchy. Remember, a republic is an element of all three forms of government, but by themselves, they have flaws that by putting all three together, you maximize the benefits of all three and strengthen yourself against any of the failings of the three.
Okay, but the thing is though that they were still very aristocratic systems. So I don't think that the idea that they were more equal, therefore the people were like less likely to rebel.
Who said that they're because they were equal they were rich? I didn't say that.
Well, they didn't have they didn't have a sense of I mean, there was still a very strong sense of class. I mean, in Sparta, for example, there was the vast majority of people were the helots. The vast majority of people in Sparta were slaves. So I think that
no, I know. What are you arguing against? I never said that Greece was rich because it was equal.
Well, I'm arguing against the idea that like the monarchy is like just waiting to be overthrown by the people. When I mean, a lot of these societies.
It's not just waiting to be overthrown by the people. But let's talk about stability. I think you would say that the Roman Empire was a classic example of a monarchy, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I think you would say the United States or even the Roman Republic are classic examples of a republic, right?
Okay.
Okay, how many emperors got killed and only ruled for like a year or two compared to how many violent internal disputes over succession took place in the Swiss, American, and Roman republics?
Well, and the Roman Empire was one that pretty much the emperor was executed every 2 or 3 years. But yeah. I think though that one thing that I often notice though is that in societies they really just tend to, even republics often tend to eventually revert to monarchy, because when you look at a lot of these ancient societies that were republics. They eventually became monarchies again.
But again, this isn't an argument. I mean, we all came out of anarchy, and left to our own devices, humans tend to revert back to anarchy unless some outside force steps in to order things. So the fact that it's just the way it's always been, that just proves anarchism.
Well, not necessarily, because I mean, society isn't like going back to anarchism. I don't think that, because here's the thing: I think anarchism is not actually even possible, because I think that man in nature is just an authoritarian creature. I think that what would actually end up happening is a system that would be similar to monarchy. So I think that some kind of some kind of like either monarchy or some kind of authoritarian system would supplant anarchy. So I don't think that anarchy really is human nature at all. I think that something a lot more similar, like in any kind of in any kind of society that's structured in any way, shape, or form, anarchy would never exist. It would be some kind of system that resembles monarchy.
Well, what you mean when you impose external pressures on the individual to develop a new system?
Well, whenever there's a collective society that actually exists, in the sense that it can be considered a society and not just wild animals, really.
Yeah, well, exactly. But that's the same thing. The barbarism is the natural state of man, and so you have to impose some form of order on that state of man to get something beyond barbarism. And when we look at, say, again, the dawn of the West was under competing republics in ancient Greece, and then the grandeur that was Rome was laid by the principles of republican government.
Yes, but at the same time, though, I mean, like, kind of like I said, I mean, to me, I don't really care what the system is. It's just that I would like one that's a more hierarchical system, and I just see that monarchy is a good example of that. But I mean, I've said in the past that I don't think that that it's a realistic goal for me to strive towards. So I think that is really the key is to create something that resembles some kind of hierarchical, some kind of stable, and some kind of long-lasting system. Because I mean, I don't really see how they're ever going to restore like a monarchy, and I don't know if it would work in the present day. But the point is that I want to restore some kind of hierarchical, long-lasting system, and what that is, it really doesn't matter. It's the more the function that it serves.
Well, sure, but the claim being made here is which is better for the interests of the people. So let's limit it to one country, Rome. Now, Rome under the Republic, which was ultimately rich, powerful, and when it became an empire, they brought in foreigners into the army, and the foreigners overthrew the empire and looted it, the German tribes. So we see that under the Republic, Rome was prosperous and thriving, but then when it converted to the empire, it brought in foreigners who then looted the country.
I mean, it still had like 2 consuls, though, and I know they only reigned for, I think.
No, I know, but that's the point. Republics don't. The Republican form of government isn't to repudiate any form of monarchical essence, but it makes the point that the monarchy on its own has negative externalities that are combated by the other 2 elements of government: the rule of the few, the Senate; the rule of the many, the tribune of the plebs.
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. The Republican principle of government doesn't say that monarchy is all bad. It admits that there are certain strengths in the executive qualities of a ruler, like you said, the 2 consuls. But what it does understand is that there are negative externalities that can arise from the sole rule of one man, and that those are counterbalanced by the rule of the few, the Senate, and the rule of the many, the tribune of the plebs.
All right. So I think though that
because real quick, I gave you 2 examples: the Vortigern and the Roman Empire being overrun by foreign invaders invited by the monarchies, whereas the Roman Republic never would have dreamed of doing that.
But the thing is that I think that's kind of more just the result of a corrupt system, because I see the same thing taking place in, say, places like France and Britain today.
Yeah, but you also got to remember that these groups aren't national anymore. They're trying to create the supranational EU and then the more broader international global order. So this whole trend of NGOs trying to impose their will on nations to amalgamate them. That's not actually even what the Jacobins stood for, or the nationalists in Germany and Italy during the middle of the 19th century. This is a repudiation of the Republican principle. It's internationalism and corporatism.
Yeah, but I don't think that monarchy was always an international thing. I mean, I do think that like they were competing with each other and they had like their own lands. I mean, I don't think that. Oh.
In 1910, only two monarchs in Europe were of the same ethnicity as the people they ruled over. That's the definition of a foreign international power.
But I would say that in 1910, Western civilization was at the best that it ever was. I think that that was the height of Western civilization and around that time.
Okay, so then you're not really a nationalist then.
Well, I would be then, because back then they had that's what they had. I mean, they.
Well, no, they were empires. I mean, I'm confused here. You say on the one hand, the fruits of empire made Europe better than ever before, which is true. But then you say, well, I don't like international forces intruding into England. Well, England was ruled by international finance. Now that led to England becoming quite powerful, but that was an international, ultimately unaccountable body.
Well, would you say it was not better for Europe, though? I mean, the thing is that.
Okay, well then you're not a nationalist. Then you're saying that it's better to be an empire, which, I mean, that's fair enough, but that's not nationalism.
Well, I think that, well, the thing is that British nationalism existed in England whilst it was an empire of its own. Here's the thing. I think that, and I also think that you know, the same sense of nationalism existed in many of these in all these European countries, but they still had empires. I don't think that the two are I don't think that it's a dichotomy necessarily.
Well, it is. If you talk to the nationalists that historically rose in Europe, they were like, you know, down with the monarchy, like in France and elsewhere. Now, sometimes they couldn't remove the monarchy in one fell swoop, so they compromised, like in Italy. But regardless, as Quinn Ledeen said, monarchy is an international institution, and he's an arch reactionary.
But I don't think that nationalists necessarily would have been opposed to empire.
Well, do you have any example of like 19th century nationalists that within Europe were like, okay, you know, we don't want this or that? Because there's nationalism can also mean a couple of things, right? There's the debate between civic and ethno-nationalism that was kind of big on the internet before Charlottesville. And so nationalism, what kind of nationalism are you talking about? A kind of like ethno-nationalism, a civic
nationalism? That's what I would be talking about.
Ethno-nationalism.
More or less, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, again, if you look at the alt-right, they're all like, no, we don't want empires. That's bad. It's bad for ethno-nationalism.
Well, I mean, yeah, in the present day, I don't think you can have that. So, I mean, I don't think it's gonna exist in the present day. What I'm saying though is that I'm not necessarily opposed to a society expanding. I think that it really is kind of that really kind of is how you would advance your society. So the British advanced Britain and its empire by expanding. So I mean, they went off to Canada, they went off to Australia, they went off to America, New Zealand, and all these places, and you know that this was how they advanced their society. And I think that and I don't think that's necessarily anti-nationalist, because it's really it's a way of strengthening your own society. Whereas, I mean, I guess like for I guess for the people that were conquered, you could say that it was bad, even though I would also dispute that. I also do think that colonialism was I think it was mostly good for most people that most lands that were colonized. I do think it was a net positive by far. But I don't think that that necessarily makes you an anti-nationalist.
So would you say that sending your own people to die in a war that doesn't directly concern their security, like, for example, the U.S. in Iraq, or maybe Britain and China with the Opium Wars, is that against the interests of the nation or for it?
I think that I think it depends on the case, because I do think that that expansionary measures are not necessarily against the interests of the nation always. So I do think that, say, sending British troops to take New France in Canada during the Plains of Abraham, I'd say that's perfectly fine. That's within national interests of both the British and the British Empire. I think that, say, sending troops to possibly quash the American Revolution, even though it obviously didn't work. I don't necessarily think that's that's an anti that's kind of like an anti-British measure by sending them off to fight in a foreign war. I do think it really just depends on the case. Where I do think something like Iraq, like, I mean, I don't see how on earth the American people would have benefited from that. I don't see how it's completely serving like a foreign interest, whereas I don't think that's always the case, though.
Okay, now back to the British Empire. When it comes to the development of the political systems that we both don't like, the leftist progressive systems, when you get to the 20th century, when the British Empire is at the peak of its power, it's essentially liberal. And, in the post-war era, they talk about socialism, and ultimately, after the war with Clement Attlee and the NHS, they do impose socialism on England. But
by then it was like completely over. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, but the point is that these were arch imperialists too, which is, you don't often think that now because the left is often seen as a critic of imperialism. But in that period, the first half of the 20th century, a lot of these radical progressive types like Bertrand Russell were arch imperialists. So there is this commonality. There's this overlap of interests that allows it to happen. And then furthermore, obviously, fighting 2 world wars that bankrupted England and losing the empire was definitely not in England's self-interest.
Well, I agree with that. But the thing is that I think that I think though that at that time, one thing that was really a net positive for the British Empire was having the idea of a monarchy. I know that it didn't serve the purpose of a ruler, but it did serve as a purpose of that kind of foundation, which really was like the force that bound society together. I mean, there's when the Canadians went off to World War I, they had the Union Jack everywhere. They had the pictures of King George. They had an idea that they were part of the same empire as the British and the Australians and all these other places. And I think that the monarchy really was a net positive there, that it really kind of unified these people and that they were all kind of subjects of the same crown. I think that that's something that I think that that's a real positive of that the British Empire had.
Well, given that in those wars they used that to mobilize to destroy England itself, is that really a good thing?
Well, I mean, did they necessarily destroy England itself, though? I mean, because I would agree that I would agree that it caused a lot of destruction, and of course the 2 world wars brought about the end of the empire. But I think though that if there was a real threat, then I think that it was a good thing, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily in those wars, because in the 19th century, Canadians thought of themselves as Britishmen. They thought of themselves as Englishmen, Scotsmen, who all shared the same monarch as their brothers over the sea. And like, to me, that's just something that that's an idea that I really like, because I think that it can connect people separated by an ocean to their own their own ancestry through that. I think the monarchy really was a positive symbol of that.
Well, yeah, sure, monarchy could do that, but by the same token, radical socialism can too. During the Cold War, revolutionary movements all over the world had an affinity with one another and with the Soviet Union. Now, you wouldn't want that, because that leads to a lot of terrible consequences. But just the fact that you have to look at the externalities that arise as well, not just the fact that it binds people together. Like, what are the externalities that come up?
Well, I think that one of the positives also is that it's an idea of the state kind of being kind of having a lineage, and that it's passed on from one generation to the next generation. Like, to me, I think that is a positive thing, because because the real problem we have today is that we don't really have any connection with the civilization we've been handed down, and we have no idea what it is that we are going to pass on. We don't even have any plan whatsoever. I think that that the monarchy, I think it helped serve that purpose, because it was an idea that this is the same state that existed 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And I know that over those times there had been I know that in certain cases there could be a change in the ruling house. But I do like that idea of like this long-lasting lineage of a society. And I mean, it could be replicated under republicanism, but I do like that in a monarchy, it's your ruler, it's your sovereign that is being inherited from generation to generation. I really like that idea of kind of the passing on of rule.
Now, yeah, we mentioned before this that you would have agreed with Hoppe that constitutional monarchies, like the one England had after 1688, were not true monarchies. They were shadows, right?
Well, kind of like I said at the beginning, I think that monarchy serves two purposes. One to be like kind of a societal foundation. This one, so it's more of a like I said with the British monarchy in the 19th century and the early 20th century. That's what I think the purpose that it served. And then the other purpose is this purpose of a ruler. And yes, I would argue that that the British monarchy hasn't really played that role for quite some time. Yes.
Okay, well then all the riches and wealth the British Empire brought in couldn't be attributed to the monarchy, since the monarchy wasn't really an active part.
Well, but I mean, you have to remember though that Europe prior to what's it called? Prior to 1789 though, I mean, it was pretty much entirely monarchies. And I mean, I guess England in if we want to put the date at 1688. I mean, these European empires and Europe had already been developing rapidly in this time. So I mean, the scientific revolution had already taken place, and all these other positives had taken place. Now, I don't think it's entirely monarchy. I don't think monarchy is necessarily the one and only reason for this, but I do think that the idea of an aristocracy, I think, was very beneficial to this development.
Okay. Well, since you're talking about the wealth of Europe, okay, well, republics win because the United States created the most wealth in the history of mankind and outproduced Europe in 2 world wars.
Yeah, because it wasn't destroyed by the 2 world wars.
No, well, no, when the World War started in 1914, nobody had been attacked yet. And most of the fighting was on the frontier of the empires until the very end. But and England wasn't attacked directly in World War I, and yet the United States vastly outproduced everyone.
Yeah, but prior to 1914, the United States was not like the undisputed world superpower, though. I mean, it was a powerful state, but it wasn't until 1945, after Europe had been completely destroyed, that the United States really became this world superpower.
Well, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the economic output in production, which even in 1914 was astronomical. And furthermore, the closer in Europe you were to a true monarchy, a monarch without accountable only to God, as you said, were the most backward, reprobate, and open to communist revolutions like Russia. Whereas, I mean, they were still stuck in the Middle Ages. Austria-Hungary, in many ways, was still stuck in the Middle Ages. And the further west,
I don't think. Not really. What about Germany, though? I mean, Germany in 1914.
Germany's king really wasn't all that powerful. I mean, if you look at the unification of Germany, it was Bismarck, the prime minister, that held most of the power.
But I mean, the monarch still wielded power in Germany, though.
Yeah, he had more than England, but a lot less than Russia. And the further east you go, the power of the monarch is more centralized, more unaccountable, and they tend to get poorer.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of absolute monarchy, by the way. I'm in favor of a mixed system, but I would look at something like, say, I would look at, say, the German Empire as a good example. Maybe I think Austria-Hungary was another good example. But I think that I'm not necessarily in favor of absolute monarchy, but I'm more in favor of it for the symbolic purposes, and then B, I think the idea of kind of the long lasting kind of the societal lineage that I had mentioned before. So I don't necessarily think that absolute monarchy is the only example of true monarchy.
Okay, but Austria-Hungary wasn't stable. That's why you had those different ethnic groups trying to leave the empire, which ultimately they did when the empire was defeated. Whereas the more homogeneous French, Germans, British, and Americans were more Russia and Austria, the Ottoman Empire, the classic monarchies, were all polyglot societies that crumbled under the pressures of modern war.
But do you think that state would have been more stable as a republic, though?
If Russia had continued to, well, it hadn't been a republic in ages. The last time was before the Mongols took over. Yeah, most likely, probably, because when you look at the historical record, republics win. Rome, as a republic, defeated all the Hellenistic heirs of Alexander, and the French Republic defeated, until Napoleon went full retard, was defeating all the European powers. Then the United States finished off Europe. Republics are better able to bind people together and leverage solidarity to achieve a common objective.
But I don't agree that Austria-Hungary, as it existed, would have been less stable as a republic. I think as a republic, it would have fallen apart more quickly, because I don't think that it's necessarily the idea of that it was the monarch that made Austria-Hungary unstable. It was the idea that it had like all these different ethnicities within one state. That was really what made it unstable. It's not necessarily the monarchy that did that. I think that kind of the monarchy would have been one of the only things that could have even kept it together for as long as it did, because I mean, the Austrian Empire was not necessarily a short-lived empire. I mean, it had been, the Habsburgs had ruled for around 500 years or so. So I think that it's definitely not the monarchy that was what made Austria-Hungary unstable. It's the conglomerate of ethnicities in it, which I think without the monarchy would have fallen apart even faster.
So before I answer this, would you say that giving universal suffrage to the adult male population, that's moving in the wrong direction, right? Those are the wrong steps.
I'd say generally yes. Those are wrong steps.
The Austro-Hungarian Empire in the lead up to World War I, the only way they concluded they could preserve the empire was by copying the United States. That's in their own written records, and that's why Gavrilo Princip assassinated Franz Ferdinand. So they were literally saying the only way to save the empire was by copying the United States form of government.
Well, because I am opposed to the idea of democracy, because the problem would be, I mean, would have been clear if it had existed in Austria-Hungary, because what you'd end up with is a parliament of different ethnicities grappling over power, which is what I really see the future of the United States being, and I see the future of Europe. And this is really my main opposition to the democracies of the present day, is what they're creating is a system which there is no like centralized force, and you're going to end up with different factions using the system to grapple over power. As in, they're going to be creating voter blocks and competing with each other in a zero-sum game for power. Whereas I don't think that under a aristocracy or a monarchy you would have that same problem, because there is there is one centralized force of power.
No, Endeavor, you didn't listen. The Austrian monarchy said that their system had failed. They were going to copy the United States and the Swiss. They were going to give universal male suffrage to all men within the empire. That was the only way they could conclude to keep the empire afloat.
Well, I'd say that's a bad idea. I'd say that, I mean, it didn't work, obviously.
Well, then they didn't get a chance to implement it. They lost the war before they could. So,
well, I don't think it would have worked if they had done it. I think it would have just broken up just as fast.
Well, Switzerland does a pretty good job with different ethnicities: German, French, and Italian.
Yeah, but Switzerland though, there was a video by Black Pigeon Speaks that the one thing with Switzerland is that they have a system that is kind of like not a federation, but a confederation, somewhat. I mean, I know it's not officially one, but the benefit of it is that they kind of have they kind of have a sense of autonomy between each of the groups, where they each have their own. There isn't the sense that they're necessarily grappling for the same zero sum game of power, and that's really what would be able to hold a society like Switzerland together, in that that it's not this system where it's just a universal suffrage with everyone gets the right to vote, and then it's like, you end up with these blocks of these voter blocks competing against each other for power, because they've set it up in that each, like, of the French, the Italians, the Germans and Switzerland kind of have like their own culture and their own kind of sense of autonomy.
Well, but again, that's what the Austrians were going to do. They were going to model off the Swiss. So instead of, they're not going to be amalgamating these ethnicities.
Okay, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. Like, what they did do is they had a dual monarchy, which actually I think it was Franz Ferdinand that was going to make it a tri-monarchy with so Hungary and the Slavs. I think it was that because he was going to appease the nationalists by introducing a third element to the monarchy that they had.
Yeah. But here's the thing: the closer in Europe, the closer the form of government was to a, for lack of a better word, bourgeois republic, the more the wealthier it was, the more powerful its military was, and the better able it was to survive the shocks of World War I. Because World War I, being the total war that it was, lasting 4 years, these monarchic systems, the more reactionary old school monarchies, just cracked up. The British, the French, I mean, they survived barely. It was a tough call for everybody. But the fact is, in a war of endurance, they lost.
Well, I mean, I think that I do like the idea of confederation a lot better than federation. But I do think that if you're going to have one of those, I mean, you would need to have some kind of centralized force, because I don't see how. I don't see the system that we have today as really one that's going to be long lasting if it's really just this zero sum game. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, yeah, the system we have today won't last, and I think you and I would both agree that a lot of what's wrong with our system is the amount of socialism that's been added to it.
Well, I think that's a result of this. Like I said, this like zero sum game of power where everyone's trying to extract from the state rather than provide into it. And I think that kind of the reason for that is that there really is that lack of unification. And I mean, really, the thing is that what I'm looking for is a way to really kind of give society a new foundation. And I like I said, I don't think that monarchy is going to happen, but I think that it had played that role in the past. I mean, if you've seen my video on monarchy, I had explained this. Whereas I don't think that I mean, I don't necessarily think republicanism is incapable of doing that, but I think that the current states that we have just lack this altogether. That's the real problem that I have.
Yeah. So to back up, so you're agreeing with Hoppe then that the private governments, aka monarchies, are less extractive and parasitic than public governments, republics.
Yes, I would generally agree. I would generally agree with that in most cases. That monarchy was less, I'd say, less extractive, in that I don't think that the powers that be were necessarily thinking of ways that they could extract things from the state. But I think that there's a lot more of a there's a lot more of a resistance to that. There's a lot more ways to protect from that.
And so economic growth would be the result of a low predatory state, right?
Generally, yes.
Okay, well, the historical record's exactly the opposite. Russia had no economic growth up until 1914, or very little, and the United States was the world's largest economy.
Well, like I said though, it's that you would need the system that that you're not having like people that the politics isn't run necessarily to make people extract from the state. That's really the key. So you would need some way of preventing that, and I think that the kind of the liberal system of today is really what creates that.
Well, it's creating that now, but the monarchies created that. I mean, look at Russia compared to the United States from 1776 to 1914. Russia was the parasitic, not the United States.
Well, I think the problem was though that they didn't have the. I mean, it obviously didn't have the economic. It didn't have the economic growth, so there really. I mean, in the case of Russia, there really wasn't much to actually extract. Whereas I think that, and I mean, I think that one thing that the United States had going for it, and what it's lost, is the idea of Americanism, which I've heard people being critical of it before. I mean, I'm not entirely in favor, but I do think that there was positive aspects of it, and that it was the idea that that they kind of created their own. They created this own kind of like ethno identity of American. I know that it didn't necessarily exist 100%, but the problem is that kind of that foundation, that was kind of their foundation, and that's kind of gone now, and that's why I think it's kind of devolved into this extractive system, because there isn't really any sense that you have to put anything into it, whereas today it's just completely extractive. I mean, that's what the direction that it's going.
So wait, you're saying that starting in 1776, because of course that's when the United States declares its independence, there was less to extract in Russia than the United States. Russia was like 100 times larger than the United States, with like 10 times or more of the 20 times the population.
Well, there was nothing to extract because they had no economic growth.
No, that's an absurd claim. Russia had far more wealth than we did. I mean, they had large standing armies, which is based off extracting wealth. We couldn't have a standing army. Oh, I don't know when we got one. It was a long time. And they were able to maintain one consistently, which shows a lot of wealth extraction. The other thing is, Russia's rich in natural resources. The 13.
Well, okay, I think you might have misunderstood what I meant, though. Is that it's not necessarily that the state has wealth. It's that So I mean, the problem that you brought up was the introduction of socialism. When I say extractive, it's that kind of the politics is run in that people are kind of trying to vote for what they can really take from the system, and not really what they can get, and without having to give into the system. And this is the real danger brought about by things like mass immigration, because what they're going to be doing with these systems is they're bringing in these new classes that these politicians want to vote for them, and they're going to implement socialist policies to extract wealth from the wider society. And I mean, that's the real problem. And the problem is that the system is set up that it allows for politicians to do that. And that's kind of one of my real problems with the liberal democratic system. I mean, if there was a republic that was not democratic and prevented them from doing that, then I mean, I'd be okay with it. The thing is that that's kind of the real problem that I'm trying to address today.
Well, okay, we will both agree that in 1900, both the United States and Russia, they had this sort of like, our people first, right? So they weren't having all these foreign invaders coming in, mooching off. Okay. Now, why is it that the failure of the United States in the past 50 years is an argument against republicanism, but the fact that all the European monarchies failed is not an argument against monarchy?
I don't think it's an argument against republicanism. It's an argument against egalitarian rule. It's an argument against it's an argument in favor of aristocracy.
Yeah, in that case, I would agree. I don't think you should have a universal franchise, but we didn't in the United States. Not initially. It gradually was phased in.
Well, yeah, I'd say that's kind of the problem, though.
Well, it is the problem, but the Austrians are going to do that too, so they were no more uniquely robust against that either.
Well, yeah, I mean, the argument is that I mean, my argument is not necessarily against my argument is more just against an egalitarian system rather than one against a I mean, it's an argument for an aristocratic system, and I really care more about how that functions rather than how it actually I mean, what the exact structure of it is. I mean, it's the functionality that really matters. And I guess just today that we don't have that functionality, and that you really have this system of rule that is really kind of, I mean, in my sense, an unnatural one, and a one that really is not stable, and kind of really just sucking the resources of the West dry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Egalitarianism is the problem, but the history, of Republican government as well, with Athens and Rome and the Dutch and the Swiss and now the United States, has had that tradition. Nobody has it anymore now. But you also mentioned that since restoring a monarchy is largely beyond the realm of what is currently achievable, well,
Yes.
then it would make sense then to advocate for traditional Republican values, which are aristocratic. You read the Roman Republic, and it's full of these patricians and nobles, engaging in the civic life.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the only way you'd be able to go, because, yeah, like I said, I mean, I don't really see how you'd restore a functioning monarchy. I think that's not really in the realm of reality right now. So I would be looking toward possibly toward a more aristocratic system. I mean, I think that the countries that still have monarchies should retain them, and I think that they should definitely use them for the symbolic purposes. I think that actually would be a very net positive if they were ever able to do that. But the point is that they need to have a system that is more structured, that has a more that's more stable, and that's really just more long lasting, and that's really that's kind of really how that's really what I'm looking for. I mean, because I don't think the United States will ever be a monarchy, and I mean, I don't think I don't think that's ever a realistic goal to strive toward.
Well, I mean, I think we both agree on the need for some larger purpose that ties people together, that persists through time as an identity. What that is, there's room for debate and disagreement, but I think we do agree on that key fact.
Yeah, because I mean that's really just the fundamental problem that I see today. I mean, I think that I think the real argument that I was making was that I think that monarchy provided. I think monarchy was a force that provided something that in the past that that I think was positive toward that.
Well, yeah, but we could all agree that there's more than one way to provide it, and like
I said, I agree with that. I think it's just,
and while we acknowledge that monarchy is one way to provide it, I think this debate was which one is the best way to provide it. Because I'm not saying that monarchy can't provide it, and you're not saying republics can't provide it. I think the issue was which one is better able to provide these factors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I one thing that I do like about monarchy is that it is like I said earlier, it's something that's hereditary, in that you kind of have the sense of a living power, and that kind of like just a man in nature. He wants to pass on his well-being to his next generation, and that he wants to pass on his wealth, and really just a better life to the next his son. I think that the idea that I do like the idea that of a monarch kind of passing that on to kind of their rule, their domain, and kind of preserving that, because they know that it's something that they need to give on to their son, and that their son will have to give it on to his.
So but that's just a genetic lottery. You have no guarantee he's going to be a qualified or good ruler.
But I think, though, that there has been plenty of great. I think there's been plenty of great monarchs in history.
Well, sure, but do you reliably produce great monarchs? For example, if you look at the Ottoman Empire, for the first maybe 150 years, they had dynamic and aggressive rulers, but then they went into terminal decline, and the system just got worse and worse and worse.
I think that there's been more great monarchs in history than elected politicians.
But well, in the sense that they survived, or that they
In that they had positive contributions. Like I can't think of a single politician in the last 70 years that I actually think was a good leader.
well, the past 70 years, yeah, but we got to look at the Roman Republic, the the Greek republics throughout the history, and they have look at for example, for longevity, the Venetian Republic lasted over 1,000 years, and they had a series of highly qualified rulers that would look out for the interests of the Commonwealth. Whereas with monarchies, it tends to be the distribution is more spotty, where you have some good rulers here, then some bad rulers, and then some good rulers, and a string of bad rulers,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like a roller coaster.
Well, remember what I said though is that I think that there's been more good monarchs than elected politicians. So
Well, again, but an elected politician isn't really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the principles of republicanism, and the Greeks and the Romans and the Venetians wouldn't be. Some of them were elected, but they wouldn't be elected in the sense that you're speaking of it now.
well, yeah, exactly. But I think that I think that really it's kind of I think that I think that the idea of aristocracy does breed a lot better rulers, and that kind of that they're raised in a class that is they try to ingrain kind of a virtue that that you'd want really society to you kind of want the kind of virtues that you'd want a ruler to have, and that you kind of want to reflect in society as a whole. I do think that aristocracies are a lot better at producing that than, well, any system in the last 70 years has ever been able to do.
Well, in the last 70 years, sure, but let's look at we don't often have tests and controls to look for in history, but when we look at who is better able to produce good leadership, republics versus monarchies, it's if you look at the Roman era, it's republics, because all the Hellenistic monarchies were destroyed by Rome. They consistently had high-level quality leadership, whereas the Hellenistic monarchies had consistently bad leadership.
But at the same time, though, that they would have been raised in a like the ruling classes of Rome, though they would have been raised in in the upper classes. So it's not necessarily I guess a pleb that would have just like rose up to become the ruler.
No, it wouldn't have been a pleb, but the point is the leadership in Rome was selected from the eligible patricians who were elected to serve, whereas in the Hellenistic monarchies, the guy was just there by birth, and I guess you couldn't get rid of him unless you killed him or had him exiled. Exile is a possibility as well. But if you look at the two methods for choosing rulers, the Roman experience shows us that it's better to do that by choosing them through an election. Now, also, we see within the Roman Empire itself, the five good emperors, which Marcus Aurelius ended, they did not choose their own children to be the emperor. They chose someone that they adopted who they thought was qualified to rule. And the system broke down when Marcus Aurelius allowed his son Commodus to succeed in a hereditary sense.
But I mean, there's still quite a few examples, though, of hereditary monarchies that had pretty successful rulers, though.
Well, yes, but remember, we're talking about on average, which system is better able to provide quality leadership. You'll find some bad republics and some good monarchies, but if we look at the historical record, when they come into conflict, republics tend to have higher quality leadership over the longer period of time.
Yeah, well, I guess it just depends on what systems they have at establishing that leader, because I think that you would need to have some kind of system in place that you'd be able to develop good leaders, because you would really want them to you really want them to kind of be a symbol that the society can really identify with. And I mean, the problem I see is just that today is that we don't have that. And I think that if we're able to recreate that in some sense of a republic, I mean, I'm all for it, but the thing is that I mean, I don't see how I just don't see how the current system is able to is able to provide that though.
Oh, I know. I agree. The current system is not able to provide that, and we also agree that at this moment in time, restoring royal houses where they don't already exist, it's not really an option. So, from your point of view, trying to restore these kinds of principles, I think it would behoove you to advocate Republican principles and point to Rome, the Swiss, the Dutch, the early American Republic.
Yeah, I think that yeah, really the idea that I try to get across is that you really just want to reinstate principles of leadership that that really that were really more long lasting and really more stable, and I think really just embodied a lot more virtue than the ruling classes that of today do. And I'd say that really what's the best way of doing that? Well, that's hard to say today. But I think that's really kind of just the question that we have going forward.
Yeah, I agree. On that note, do you think maybe we should wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we went on for about an hour and a bit over an hour. Any final words, Todd?
No. Just thanks for having me on, Endeavor.
Yeah, interesting conversation. I think that yeah, I think the real question that we have today is what is the way that we can really reinstate something of long lasting and something that you really can build a societal foundation on. And I think that it doesn't really matter what the system is. It's the point is that we don't have that today. And that's really something that really needs to be kind of rediscovered in some way, shape, or form. But anyway, anything last to say?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Well, anyway, thanks for coming on, Todd. It was an interesting discussion. Yeah, so I'm having another live stream tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. I've set up a Bitchute and a Gab account as kind of my backups to YouTube. So I linked those down below. I uploaded my most recent video to Bitchute also. So subscribe to me there if you'd like to kind of have like a backup in case, I don't know, my channel gets deleted or something like that. But anyway, thanks for coming on, Todd, and I'll talk to you all later.